So yeah, at such a young age, I lived a life full of hedonism, full of partying, drinking, girls, gambling. At the peak of my hedonism, I travelled to Portugal to get some tattoos, as you can see. I travelled there with a very sore throat and it hurt a lot. Over time, I felt myself getting closer and closer to Islam. It made sense, right? It was very logical, very rational. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Hi, my name's Mark, or Mark Nakizi on YouTube. I'm 25, from London, and yeah, I'll be sharing my reverse story today. I was raised in London by an atheist father and a Christian mother, and I attended gospel church every single Sunday, and I absolutely hated it. So when my dad gave me the option of stopping Sunday school, stopping going to church, I was so relieved and so happy. And I think from then onwards, I saw atheism as a very positive thing. So yeah, at such a young age, I lived a life full of hedonism, full of partying, drinking, girls, gambling, experimenting with drugs, a bunch of wild stuff, honestly. And even at that time, I felt there was a certain presence. I didn't quite know what it was, but I consciously ignored it. You know, at the time I was young, I was thinking, I'm having fun. At the peak of my hedonism, I travelled to Portugal to get some tattoos, as you can see. I travelled there with a very sore throat and it hurt a lot. It was very, very tight, but I thought it was tonsillitis. After my sessions of tattooing, I went back to my apartment and I tried to get some sleep. I was there alone. About 3 AM, I woke up and I was in so much pain and I could barely breathe. I went into the bathroom, checked in the mirror. I could barely open my mouth, but from what I could see, my tonsils were almost touching. And what was weird in that moment was the fact that even though it was getting harder and harder to breathe, I was extremely calm. And something that I haven't really told anyone, even my closest friends, was that in those moments, I genuinely accepted that I was gonna die. But I felt a very strong presence. It was this presence that I had felt throughout my life, amplified 1,000 times. So I went home and I started researching Christianity again. As I researched more and more and I wanted answers to certain questions, I couldn't really find answers that really made sense to me. Shortly after that, I met a brother who I'm very, very close with now. You know, during lockdown, we would go on walks and we became very, very close. We built a very tight bond. And he taught me about Islam. Over time, he was becoming more and more convincing. I didn't realize at the time that he was, you know, sort of planting the seed. And he told me later on that he was praying for me to revert to Islam, which is nice to hear. Over time, I felt myself getting closer and closer to Islam. It made sense, right? It was very logical, very rational. But at the same time, I was very, very reluctant. And the reason I was reluctant was because, you know, chasing pleasure, essentially having a hedonistic lifestyle, is fun in the moment. So I was thinking to myself, like, is this something that I really want to do? On my birthday, the same brother bought me an English translation of the Quran and the prayer mat. And the more that I read, the more that it started to make sense. A lot of my beliefs that I had formed, they started to be sort of pieced together. I never really fit into this sort of liberal world that we live in the West. I never did. You know, I grew up in a house where there was traditional gender roles, and that made sense to me. And seeing all this sort of unnatural stuff being promoted, it didn't feel good. The more that I read, the more that it made sense, and it was rational, you know. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is extremely reasonable in his expectations. For some reason, even at this point, even though I felt connected to Islam, I was so reluctant to revert, and I couldn't understand why. I just carried on doing more and more research. And I think I wanted to not only just have this feeling, this connection with God, I wanted to logically and rationally accept Islam. So I did more research, and, you know, the Quran predicted, it told us scientific miracles that were not known 1400 years ago, and modern science has only found these things out about 100 years ago. So certain things like that, the sort of mathematical miracles that I saw in the Quran as well, or that I researched about the Quran, you can't ignore these things. So yeah, after doing my research, I knew that I was Muslim. In my heart, I knew I was Muslim. I took my Shahada at London Central Mosque, alhamdulillah. My life has changed so much. I don't want to say I've done a 180, because that would imply that I've basically turned around and started walking backwards. Or walking forwards, but back. But what I want to say is that my life has pivoted. I think, you know, I still want money. I still want success. I still want a family. I still want all of these things. But the reason, the motivation behind it is different. It's not for the approval or attracting women. It's all for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And I try my best to keep Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in my thoughts, you know. Al-Baqarah 152. I might have gotten that wrong, I'm not gonna lie. Remember me, I will remember you. Try and remember that, and that helps me sort of keep behave, essentially. That's really what helps me. And I try and think of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in everything that I do. And obviously as Muslims, I think we should as well.